Moduls Rīga piedāvā.
Everybody in the world knows Dalai Lama, but very few have heard about Tibetan administration.
Yes.
What is it?
The Central Tibetan Administration is the democratically elected body that speaks on behalf of the Tibetan people. It is the administration that was established by His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 1959 when we came into exile due to the Chinese occupation. It was set up in India. And so the Central Tibetan Administration has basically three roles, key roles. One is, of course, to be the voice of the Tibetan people in the free world and find a solution to the current situation inside Tibet. Secondly, to look after the welfare of the Tibetan people, mainly in India. We have several settlements in India, Nepal, and a few in Bhutan. And then thirdly, with the growing diaspora, Tibetan diaspora across the world, different countries, to make sure that we are all connected and serve as the voice of the Tibetan people in the free world. Well, the Central Tibetan Administration looks after the interests of the Tibetan people for them to be free. It's not to sustain itself as an independent body and to be in competition with, for example, the Chinese government. In the Memorandum on Genuine Autonomy, the key document for the Middle Way approach where we're trying to find a solution to the current situation inside Tibet, there's a reference saying that if there is a political solution that is found, the Central Tibetan Administration will self-dissolve. So the Central Tibetan Administration, it has a moral duty to speak on behalf of Tibetans inside Tibet because they're not free to speak up on their own behalf. So once that role is fulfilled, once we have restored freedom in Tibet, then our political role is no longer necessary. Yeah, actually, Tibetan is my mother tongue, so we spoke it at home. But it's really thanks to my parents because other than at home, the regular environment was mainly French when I grew up, French and English in bilingual Canada, as you know. So, but I had an opportunity to continue studying it, though once I was an adult. I continued independent studies with Tibetan writing, reading, and also spoken is an ongoing learning process.
Can you say that you understand Western thinking as well as Tibetan?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, because I grew up in the West since the age of 4. So I'm very familiar with Western culture, but at the same time, because of my background, I'm also very rooted in traditional Tibetan values. We all have the same wish for freedom. That, I think, is the same, regardless of which country we live in, whether it's in China, Tibet, or the West. I think people's need is the same. We all yearn for freedom. But unfortunately, the democratization process just has not advanced at the same rate, at the same speed. And I think there are many different reasons for it. But I firmly believe that sooner or later, when even in countries like China, the government has to give people a voice because it's not a natural state of things for people to live under repression. On the surface, it looks better, where the Chinese government has invested millions of dollars in infrastructure development. Yet at the same time, we are seeing the erosion of the environment, increasing number of mining projects, hydroelectric projects, other projects that don't take into consideration long-term impact on the very fragile ecosystem, and also without proper consultation with the local population, whether they wish for this project or not, how it's impacting them. Some of the mining projects are occurring in areas that are historical, very important sites. And also, over the last few years, we've witnessed over 1 million Tibetan nomads being settled, being forced to sell their livestock and move into these very basic row brick houses without any planning as to how they will earn their livelihood once they've spent the few thousand renminbis that were given to them by the Chinese government. So we're talking about people who have for generations and centuries been the natural steward of the Tibetan grasslands, suddenly put into these housing settlements like Indian reserves. And it's giving rise to a lot of social problems, domestic violence, a crime rate. So we're very concerned about that. And also, another example of why things are getting worse is in the last few years, the Chinese government decided on a language policy where Tibetan schools now, other than the Tibetan language course, everything must be taught in Mandarin. And for us, and I'm sure you'll appreciate being Latvian, culture is so important to a people's identity, and all of that language is all the more important. So these are the issues that are of great deal of concern. It's just an example. And also the monasteries, these are religious institutions, but they are not allowed to be managed by the religious community. The Communist Party manages the monasteries. Very difficult to obtain information because China is very powerful in controlling information circulation, the flow of information in both directions. Information that is going from the free world into Tibet, and information that is coming from inside Tibet, what is going on the ground towards the free world. Just for example, with the unfortunate cycle of self-immolation since 2009, people have been sentenced to a few years prison just for having sent information about the self-immolation. A few years back, recently actually, entire villages had their satellite dishes on their roof confiscated because they were listening to news programs like Radio Free Asia, Voice of America, Voice of Tibet from Norway, which is their only source of information in Tibetan from outside Tibet. It's very difficult to travel to Tibet. This has been one of the issues that foreign governments have been raising with the Chinese government is access to Tibetan areas to assess what is going on on the ground. Very difficult for diplomats as well as members of the press. Some of them, fortunately, have succeeded in going secretly and have reported and even interviewed people who are related to the self-immolators, but very difficult. Right now, we, especially as an administration, we are very responsible in terms of whatever information we get, we try to validate it from a few sources as much as possible, but the borders have become so tight. For several years, Tibetans were allowed to escape from Tibet into India. Now that route has been closed, and the number of Tibetans who manage to escape even is less and less. The Central Tibetan Administration is the democratically elected representative body of the Tibetan people. Our official position is the middle way approach, which is genuine autonomy within the framework of China's constitution. We are not seeking independence, and this is also the position of the Dalai Lama. That said, we believe in freedom of speech. So within the Tibetan community, there are some who believe that we should seek independence, and we firmly believe that they have the right to have their own opinion, although we don't agree with it. But this is our position, and the Central Tibetan Administration formally adopted this policy back in 1997 when the Tibetan Parliament in exile unanimously adopted a resolution to support this policy. The middle way approach is basically, saying whenever you're trying to find a resolution to a conflict, you have to find the middle ground in a way that takes into consideration the interest of all parties involved. For us, the middle way approach is somewhere between the demand for independence and the status quo, the current situation as we know it. So for us, we're not asking for independence. At the same time, we're not accepting the situation as it is. So in the middle, we're saying, please respect your own constitution with your own laws on national regional autonomy and implement them. So that's why we are saying genuine autonomy, not just what is on paper, but put it in practice and also allow Tibetans to be under one administrative jurisdiction. Right now, Tibetans are scattered over 5 different areas, you know, the Tibetan Autonomous Region, then Qinghai, Gansu, Sichuan, and Yunnan. So we want to be under one administrative jurisdiction with genuine autonomy in matters such as language, culture, education, different areas, and religion, of course, different areas that influence our identity. No, I think that it's in the interest of Tibetans to seek a solution that is feasible. We are dealing with an urgent situation on the ground. We are not asking for independence. We believe that autonomy within the People's Republic of China has its advantages. And for us, our key concern is to find a realistic solution to a situation on the ground where it's just a matter of time before Tibetans are assimilated into Chinese culture and we lose our language and our distinct identity. So it's an urgent matter. So we have to take into consideration one of the key concerns also of the PRC, which is territorial integrity. So we're saying, you know, this is what we're willing to do as a step, you know, please engage with us to find a solution, especially while we have moral figures like the Dalai Lama, who is genuinely concerned about finding a lasting solution that addresses also the concerns of the Chinese government. You know, we have been very fortunate to find in the Indian government and in the Indian people friends who have stood by us in a very difficult moment in our history. In 1959, when China occupied Tibet, overnight, the Dalai Lama had to flee, accompanied with thousands of Tibetans who were destitute overnight. If it weren't for India, who welcomed us at that time and has since given us a home, it would have been very difficult for us. And the Indian government continues to be very supportive of our efforts to find a peaceful resolution that does not challenge China's territorial integrity. So in the early 70s, Indian government gave us parcels of land in the south of India, Karnataka, and that has become the main concentration of Tibetan communities. And we've been settled there for generations. But, you know, young Tibetans nowadays don't necessarily want to live in remote areas. Everybody, you know, they go to university, they settle down in urban areas. There's also several of them who move to the West. In India, we have an extensive Tibetan educational system. And that is thriving gradually, and we also have a university. There is a Buddhist university in Varanasi, and a Central Institute for Studies in Buddhism or something like that in Varanasi, Sarnath. And also in Bangalore, there's the Dalai Lama Institute, which is a fairly recent institution on the outskirts of Bangalore as a higher educational institution. Most of our values are strongly rooted in Buddhism. And it explains also the nonviolent nature of our struggle, political struggle. It also explains the fact that we believe that we're all connected, one way or another. We're all interdependent. So yes, it does explain a lot of the way we look at the world. Well, I'm responsible for the Department of Information and International Relations. So it's basically the Communications Department and International Relations. So we're responsible for the maintenance of the websites in 3 languages, Chinese, English, Tibetan, Chinese outreach, receiving guests to Dharamsala, and then looking over our 11 offices across the world. They are based in London, Geneva, Brussels, Washington, D.C., and then in Asia we have Tokyo, Taiwan, Australia, and also in Russia, and then South Africa, and just to name a few. And then, of course, Delhi and Nepal as well. So through them, we keep the Tibetan communities connected, but we also engage in political advocacy and making sure that people are kept up to date, as much foreign governments, as much as foreign civil society about what is going on inside Tibet. You know, in the West, just to put it metaphorically, in the West, We've spent tremendous resources exploring the outer world, space, and science. What Tibetan Buddhism has to offer is the inner world, an understanding of the inner world, of the human mind, the human heart. And there's a belief that we all have the same potential, and it's whether or not we put in that effort. And I think what summarizes it best is the constant message that the Dalai Lama brings to everywhere he goes, because he is a product of that Buddhist culture. And so it's the emphasis on the development of the heart, compassion, interdependence, that we're all connected. We don't live in isolation. And that it's nonviolence, that there is a way to address things peacefully. So I think these are some of the key values that are very much needed in today's world, I think, as well, where we perhaps sometimes attach too much importance to material development without investing in the heart, and that we all have the same need for kindness. Wherever there's an armed conflict is unfortunate. And one of the reasons that we think the Tibetan political movement is very important and solidarity with that movement is very important is because Tibet is one of the longest standing nonviolent movements in this world. And if we want to encourage peaceful conflict resolution, the world has to stand in solidarity with movements who have stuck with nonviolence as a means of achieving a goal. And otherwise, it just becomes an academic exercise where we talk about nonviolence and peaceful conflict resolution in classrooms and meeting rooms. But when it comes to real life situation, we're not practicing those principles. So we don't want the Tibetan nonviolent political movement. We want it to be an inspiration for people who are vacillating between armed conflict and nonviolence, and be an inspiration for them to resort to through nonviolence and not be a source of cynicism for future generations and other political movements who may not be as committed to nonviolence. Tibetan issue is a very good litmus test, and in order for that to be convincing that nonviolence pays, it has to yield results. And we think that Baltic countries, because there's such a historical parallel, where you've also lived under repression for 50 years, you know how important it is to not be isolated. And when you're under repression, that to feel that the world has not forgotten about you, that they stand in solidarity. At the same time, we are very understanding of the difficult positions that different countries are, given China's growing economic and political influence. But what we're saying is within that sphere, stand in solidarity. I mean, for example, I'll give you a very simple example. During one of His Holiness's last visit here, he was supposed to hold a press conference in the Opera House. But because of Chinese pressure, that venue was changed. He was supposed to be received by the MPs in the main parliament building, but because of Chinese pressure, he wasn't received in the main parliament building. So I'm saying, when you receive a host, exercise your freedom as an independent country and receive your guests the way you wish to receive them. You have to receive them in a building with 4 walls. Why not do it in a way that you think reflects the sentiments of the Latvian people? So this is just a reminder, and it's not, challenging China's territorial integrity. The Dalai Lama is a widely respected religious figure. He's a Nobel laureate. Why not give him the reception that he deserves? As much the Dalai Lama as the Central Tibetan Administration, Chinese outreach is very important, because the issue that we have right now is not with the Chinese people, it's with the Chinese government. And we make that very clear distinction. And the Dalai Lama has reminded the Tibetan people constantly, and we also believe in that. So we have always invested tremendous effort in explaining what is the Tibetan issue about to the Chinese people. And there is growing sympathy within Chinese civil society as they understand our official stand, the middle way approach, that we are, unlike what the Chinese government is saying everywhere, we are not seeking independence. So we are very encouraged with that. And like His Holiness says, the trust and the faith in the Chinese people is unwavering. Chinese people have suffered so much, and they still continue to suffer because of Beijing's repressive policies. So in a way, there is a degree of solidarity with their aspirations also for greater freedom. And the challenge with us, and this is where I hope maybe your readers can help, is the Tibetan situation is faced with this formidable, well-funded propaganda machine that is the Chinese government. We, of course, don't have the resources to match their propaganda. What we appeal to is our friends throughout the world, people who believe in peace, social justice, to help us amplify our message. And right now, it's to make the middle way approach better known. And for that, we've even created a special website. And we're asking all our friends, please share it on social network, social media, wherever you can, because a lot of people, as much in the diplomatic community or in the media, don't know about this policy. And so we're making a concerted effort, but we can't do it alone. The fact that so many people ignore this position is being taken advantage by the Chinese government. When they approach foreign government and say the Dalai Lama is a splitist and all, people don't take the time to read the memorandum, the website we've created. So they believe in what the Chinese government is saying, which is totally false. With the memorandum was presented by the envoys of the Dalai Lama officially to the Chinese government back in 2008. So it's an official document, and it's very transparent, and it's public also in the People's Republic of China. What many people don't know is that actually China became Buddhist before Tibet. So there is a historical tie with Buddhism. Buddhism was introduced in China before it was introduced in Tibet. And the number of people interested, Chinese citizens interested in Buddhism, is growing each year. And especially, you see it also in countries like Taiwan, where people are free. The interest in Tibetan Buddhism is very great there as well.